Hey, what's up guys? Zach here and welcome back to VGL. Well, it seems like Motive Studios is having some issues when it comes to the franchise of Dead Space. The future seems uncertain with the sequel they've got in the works, as well as some of the remakes, the loss of budgeting. We've got a lot of gaming insiders coming out and saying that the future is very bleak when it comes to Dead Space. So today, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I'm going to break down a few articles as well as some statements that Jeff Grubb has made, as well as Jason Schreier talking about the future of the series. Before we get started, guys, let me know in the comments section what your thoughts are on Dead Space being canceled. Do you think EA and Motive Studios actually has a future with the franchise? Don't forget, if you enjoyed this content, subscribe to the channel. And now let's talk about the future of Dead Space. So this first article actually comes from Bloomberg, and it starts off by saying that the Dead Space franchise is officially on hold at Electronic Arts. Fans had hoped for another sequel after the release last year. It continues by saying that EA put the Dead Space series on ice for the second time, despite the release of the critically acclaimed remake last year that appeared to give new life for the troubled video game franchise. Although news that the sci-fi horror series was shelved that came out this week, EA made the decision as early as last spring, according to people familiar with this project. Hopes for a new Dead Space game at EA are derailed after the sales of the remake missed the company's expectations, said that the people who asked to not be identified because they weren't authorized to actually speak on the matter. So after finishing the Dead Space remake, which was released in January 2023, a small team over at EA subsidiary Motive Studios spent a few months conceiving ideas for the new entry of the series, but it seems those plans were never given a green light and fizzled before they even got too far. Since last summer, that team has instead been exploring other ideas while the bulk developers who worked on Dead Space moved to different projects. The article then continues that the Giant Bomb YouTube channel suggested Wednesday that Motive had actually been developing a remake of Dead Space 2, and it seems that that actually might have also been shelved. Electronic Arts, based in Redwood City, California, also denied the report of that work, telling the gaming site IGN, and I quote, "We normally don't comment on rumors, but there's no validity to the story." An EA spokesperson also declined to comment further to Bloomberg. And then the article finishes out by saying the series, introduced in 2008, was received well by fans but never turned into a blockbuster that management envisioned. Now, following the disappointing 2013 release of Dead Space 3, the company shelved the series for a decade before bringing it back last year with the high-end remake of the first entry. Finally, Motive said this week it is working on two other games, a previously announced Iron Man project and a new Battlefield, which has now left the fate of this sci-fi horror series in question. So like I said previously, when it comes to talking about the future of Dead Space, a lot of it's still up in the air. They had a few remakes in the works and possibly an undeveloped title to the series. Jeff Grubb, another huge gaming insider, had this to say. He stated that the Dead Space 2 remake was canceled due to low sales, and the team now is working on Iron Man and Battlefield. And this tweet that I'm about to read kind of confirms that as well. So on Game Mess Mornings, according to Jeff Grubb, EA Motive was working on Dead Space 2 remake, which was in a concept phase but then got canceled / shelved because of the lackluster sales of the first remake, and they are now confirmed to be working on Iron Man as well as a Battlefield. So this is exactly what he actually had to say.
So they said that they're going to be a two-project team going forward, and that is going to be Iron Man and Battlefield. Lex Luddy, what does that leave out that came out last year? Does that leave out like maybe a Dead Space game?
Literally the second I saw this was, oh, we're never getting that Dead Space 2 remake, are we?
So they were working on it. They were working on Dead Space 2, and they are no longer working on it. It is on the shelf because the first games had lackluster sales, is how it was phrased to me. Yeah, so if you were looking forward to a Dead Space 2, it's bad news. It straight up is just bad news. Does this mean it never happens? I don't know if that's the case.
So you kind of heard it straight from him. It doesn't mean that it's never going to happen, but it's kind of really bad news for the future of the Dead Space franchise. There's also another thread that I was reading on Gaming Leaks and Rumors, as well as a tweet that Jeff Grubb actually put out. The thread starts off by saying that Jeff Grubb is sticking to his guns, says, "I give you my permission to believe EA or not, but Dead Space was definitely being planned. It had a code name, and they're not making it anymore." It then continues by saying Dead Space 2, this comes after EA shot down this earlier rumor today, saying that it wasn't even considered to be in development in the first place. It also continues with the full quote from Jeff Grubb, and the full quote basically said this: "I give you my permission to believe EA if you want, but whenever a company says that it isn't true, but they don't specify which part of the story they're not talking about, well, yeah, Dead Space 2 was definitely being planned. They had a code name, and now they aren't making it." Jason Schreier then tweeted back and replied to Jeff Grubb's post. It seems like he just kind of wanted to clear up any confusion that the fans were having. Motive used the same code name to describe whatever project that Dead Space Space team was working on, and that was hence the confusion on Jeff Grubb's part. It was never really a Dead Space 2 remake, and for nearly a year it's had nothing to do with Dead Space. There was also a lot of talks in the franchise to talk about doing a Dead Space 2 remake, and that was instead of doing another sequel in the franchise. And what this news means coming from EA and Motive Studios, does it kind of kill the fact that we could ever see Dead Space 4? Well, sadly, it's not out of the question, but it doesn't seem like anything in the Dead Space universe will be happening anytime soon. Over at videogamechronicles.com, they actually did their own article, kind of breaking down the responses from Jeff Grubb as well as Jason Schreier. So this article starts off by saying that the Dead Space 2 remake reportedly shelved after the lackluster sales of the first game. Motive was reportedly hoping to make a brand new Dead Space game rather than another remake, which kind of confirms that Motive Studios actually wanted to make Dead Space 4 instead of making the remake to Dead Space 2. And now plans for the Dead Space 2 remake have reportedly been shelved after the first game failed to deliver commercially. They go on by saying that that's according to Giant Bomb's Jeff Grubb. He was discussing the developer Motive's current projects following the news that EA had made the studio a part of its wider Battlefield development team. He says this, and I quote, "They were working on Dead Space 2 and they're no longer working on it. It's on the shelf because of the first game's lackluster sales." That's how it was phrased to me. Another huge takeaway is actually talking about that Motive reportedly wanted to make a brand new Dead Space game instead of the remake for Dead Space 2 that's been in the talks. It goes on by saying that announcing the studio's plans on Tuesday, Motive's GM Patrick Claus said, "The directors who delivered Dead Space Remake in 2023, Felipe Derchame, the executive producer, and Roman Campos, the creative director, will build a team at Motive to work alongside the Battlefield studios, and that's trying to build upon what's coming next for Battlefield, a universe across both multiplayer and single player experiences." He continued by saying that in parallel, development continues to move forward on our Iron Man project, and that's being led by Oliver Plux, the executive producer, and Ian Fraser, the creative director. And then Grubb ended off by saying, "So if you were looking forward to the Dead Space 2 remake, it's just straight up bad news. Does it mean it never happens? No. I don't know if that's the case, but it stands right now. They were working on it. It was in the concepting phase, I believe. It was in pre-production, and now the work has been put on the shelf and they're done with it, and the studio is now making Iron Man and Battlefield." So as of right now, everything that EA and Motive were working on when it comes to the Dead Space franchise has been shelved. It's not known whether this game that they were working on was the Dead Space 2 remake, or maybe it could have been Dead Space 4. Hell, it could have even been a full reboot of the series. But either way, the project didn't last long. It definitely didn't seem like any of the projects that Motive was working on was officially greenlit by EA. So whatever they were working on, whether it be Dead Space 4, the Dead Space 2 remake, or anything in the Dead Space universe, it seems that the Dead Space franchise is officially over, at least for right now. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if we actually get any official confirmation from EA or Motive Studios. But when we've got the big names like Jason Schreier and Jeff Grubb coming out and saying that these projects have been canceled, it's kind of hard not to believe that Dead Space 4 and anything in the future of the Dead Space franchise is ever happening. But guys, I think that's gonna wrap it up with today's video. Let me know in the comments section your thoughts. Would you have played the Dead Space 2 remake? Would you be excited for a spin-off in the Dead Space universe? Or would you even buy Dead Space 4 if it were to come out? Be sure to drop your thoughts in the comment section below. This has been Zach with VGL. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I'll catch you in the next one.